Hi everyone and welcome to another Rubber Dance Design Team tutorial. This time I'm going to be using the Antique Botanicals stamp set for the card that I'm going to show you today because the gorgeous antique drawings work really well with book pages, and that's what I'm going to be stamping on today. I really like the look of using book pages on cards and I wanted to show you this idea today. So as well as having a couple of book pages ready to work on my card, I have got my card base, and you could make the card base in any colour depending on what you decide to colour your flowers in, but the card base measures 11.5 inches by 5 3/4 inches, and then with the card in the landscape position I've scored it at 2 7/8, and then I've flipped the cards 180 degrees or rotated it 180 degrees, and then again scored it at 2 7/8. And when you fold both of those pieces in from the right and the left, you should end up with a perfect gatefold card that meets in the middle. So on top of the gatefold pieces, I've cut 2 pieces of book pages that I'm going to stamp on, and I have cut them to measure 2 5/8 by 5.5 inches. So that's 2 pieces of book paper, and then inside I've got a piece of cream cardstock that measures 5.5 inches square. And as usual, I like to make the inside match the outside, particularly on a gatefold card, because you're going to be able to see it when the card is standing. And although I've cut these strips slightly too long, you're going to need to cut 2 pieces of book paper that measure 5.5 inches by 3/4 of an inch. So I'm just going to trim mine to length. And I've got one more thing. I've used a die for the happy birthday sentiment that's going to go in the middle of the card, and I've already cut that out in the burgundy cardstock. I had plenty left over from trimming the card to 5 3/4 inches, and I've used a tattered lace die in order to cut out my sentiment, but you could equally stamp your sentiment if you want to. So now it's time to get on with the stamping, and I'm going to start out with the 2 strips of paper first. I'm going to be using a black archival ink, and I'm using 2 of the flowers from the Antique Botanical stamp set. This is the Antique Botanical stamp set, and I'm using these 2 flowers for my card. So starting out with the camellia, which is the largest of the 2 flowers, I've mounted my stamps onto my acrylic blocks, and you can see I'm actually using any foam mount whatsoever, and this is testament to how well these stamps are made and cut and how deep the etching is on them, because these are quite intricate designs by the lovely Katie, a fellow design team member, and they really stamp well without any kind of mounting of the stamps whatsoever, as you can see. So I'm stamping the largest flower in the middle and then stamping the smallest flower at both ends, and it really doesn't matter if they match up perfectly, because I'm going to be sticking one of these strips at the top of the card and one at the bottom. I just want a little bit of that design brought into the center of the card. So putting those to one side for a moment, we're going to be stamping on the 2 pieces that will be put onto the front of our card. So just making sure that the text is up the right way. And the other thing that I'm going to do, just so you can see the plan here, is I want them to be spaced about the same distance as they are once they'll be placed on the card. So I'm saying roughly 1/4 of an inch apart, and I'm going to try and maintain this gap, particularly while I stamp the centre flowers. So first of all, I'm stamping a big camellia into the middle. If you find that your paper slips about a bit, you could always do this on a scrap piece of paper, which would sort that out a little bit, because the shiny surface of the stamp mat does make the papers move around a bit. So I'm just turning the stamp so that the stem of the camellia is on the left hand panel of the book papers. and all will be revealed once we get a little bit further with this card. So the placement of that camellia is quite important to the design that we're going to put on top of it. So once that's in place, we're going to be stamping a camellia in each of the corners of this book paper, and then we're going to fill in with the smaller flower. So it doesn't really matter which way round you choose to stamp your camellias from this point onwards, but it's quite nice to get the flower rather than the stem on the card. So I'm inking up my stamp as I go and then working in all four corners. So I'm being sort of random but with a plan. So I'm making sure that I don't bring my camellias too far into the centre because I want to have a gap where I can stamp the smaller flower. So you can see that I really have stamped them in the corners. I haven't tried to get the whole camellia onto the card, and now I'm inking up the smaller of the two flower stamps, and I'm going to stamp that in the spaces that I have remaining. So if at any time you lose that gap when you're stamping the three flowers that go across that gap in the centre, then just move it back to that 1/4 of an inch increment and then carry on stamping. Clean up any mess from the overstamping, and then you want to have a piece of scrap card. Now it could be any colour, but because I cut a 5.5 inch square from a piece of A4 cardstock, I had this little strip left over from the bottom, which is 5.5 inches wide, and then the remainder of the A4 in width. And I'm going to be using that to stamp the camellia that's going to form the centre of the gatefold card. But before I do that, I want to add a piece of book page onto the top of this piece of card. So I'm going to hazard a guess that it's about 5.5 inches by, we take that from 8, 5.5, 6.5, 7.5. So it's about 2.5, 2 3/4 inches wide. It just needs to be wide enough to fit that camellia stamp. And making sure that it's text that is covering the piece of card, I'm gluing the book page onto the piece of card using PVA glue, and then making sure it's nice and stuck down, and then trimming away the excess book paper with my scissors. Now the reason we're doing this is because we're going to decoupage the camellia for the centre of the card, and the book paper alone is not robust enough to hold its form and give our flower shape. So we still want to maintain that book page look, so we're covering a piece of card with the book paper. So any little pieces that you might find we haven't quite glued them properly, just glue them down as you go. You might find you reveal some more as you decoupage the flowers. So I'm just checking my edges, and then we're ready to begin stamping. So once again, inking up with my black archival ink, and I'm going to aim to have 2 full images of the camellia. So one will form the base layer, which will be the leaves. The next one we will cut out the flower, and then finally we just want the flower centre. So 3 layers in total will form our decoupage. So one of the images will form the flower base. The next image we will be cutting out the flower, and then I'm just removing the end of this panel so that I can just stamp that flower centre without encroaching on the 2 images that I already have. and then it's time to cut out all of the individual pieces. So from this piece we just need the flower centre. Make sure you keep that safe and you don't throw it away as you're throwing away all the cut out pieces of your card. And then for this layer we want the entire image. You can see as I cut this out that you actually move the paper rather than the scissors as you cut around your decoupage images. So the scissors remain fairly still and you turn the paper so that you can get into all those nooks and crannies. So take your time so that you get a lovely result. And then for our second layer, so the leaves or the entire image form the base layer. We've got the flower centre for the top layer, and then we just want the flower itself for the middle layer. So removing the leaves as we cut out the flower petals. You can see as I go around this leaf or petal, I'm going to remove that little piece of petal that is underneath the two larger petals because I'm going to leave that on the base layer and just have the larger flower petals on this middle layer. And then it's time to do the colouring in, but before we start you're going to attach all of the paper strips onto your card. So the two paper strips top and bottom of the cream cardstock, and the reason that we're doing this is because book pages tend to be fairly flimsy and they'll just have a little bit more body by attaching them to the card while we're colouring them in. So also attaching the die cut sentiment, and I'm going for as straight as I can, but if you want to, if you're not happy with doing straight, you could make it slightly skew, whiff, Katie corner, at an angle, all sorts of terminology for not putting it straight. And then we're going to attach the two panels to the front of the card. Now make sure you do this the right way around. So we want that central flower with the stem on the left hand panel, and then making sure again that that panel is the right way up to complete the right hand side of the card. And you can see where the flower is going to sit in the centre of the card. So you might find, because we've got these two narrow strips on the centre panel, that a little bit of scrap paper will help make sure that you don't go onto that cream cardstock. I'm just realising it here. So I've got a piece of scrap card and I'm just setting it against the edge of the strip I'm working on so that I don't slip off and mark the cream cardstock underneath. I'm keeping the colouring really light, so just zooming in a little bit here so you can see the detail, and then I'm just adding the shading where the line art indicates on the flower petals. Now the reason I'm keeping my colouring in light is because I want to just have a slightly darkened decoupage flower on the centre of the card so that the colour, as well as the fact that it's decoupage, draws the attention to the centre flower on the card design. So colouring in all of those camellia petals with the pink and adding the shading. Now, even though we will be gluing the flower onto this side of the card, I'm just colouring it in just to make sure that should any little piece of this flower show, it will have been coloured in. I'm only using 3 colours on this card, and the second colour is a golden yellow, which I'm using on the camellia flower centres and the petals of the small flower. If you can hear any noise in the background, it's just my dog flaked out on the floor, and we've got a laminate floor, so his claws make a bit of a noise as he moves. And then don't forget to colour in the small flower on the inside of the card. And then the last colour that I'm using is a sort of olive green, and I'm using that on the leaves, even though they are already quite shaded. It just gives them a hint of colour, and the small flower centres. Actually, they're large centres but small flowers. So remembering to keep your touch quite light so that we can darken the colouring in that we do on the decoupage flower. So the leaves will show on this flower, so I'm adding a bit more pressure as I colour them in with the olive green. Don't forget that some of the flower might show because it's decoupage, so I am colouring it in on that bottom image, but I'm not colouring it in as dark as I did that little tiny piece that shows. You can see that's slightly darker, and I'm also keeping it nice and dark on the flower that's going to be sitting on the top of the decoupaged image. So now we want to attach this flower to our card. So slowing it down so you can see what I'm doing. I'm just giving the flower a little bit of shape with my fingertips. So curling the leaves slightly and lifting them up. So sort of lifting them up and then curling them over. And then we're going to attach that side of the flower to the left-hand side of the card. Now it's easier to add the glue to the petals only and the stem. You don't need to add it to glue to the leaf, the small section of leaf that you can see, because we've shaped that leaf, so we don't want to glue it down flat. So that forms our base layer, and you can see we're only attaching it to the left-hand side of the card. Then we want to shape our flower. Again, I'm lifting each of the petals against my left-hand thumb, and I'm curling one of the leaves or petals upwards and the rest I'm curling down, but I'm still pushing them up against that flower centre. And then I'm adding glue to where the centre of the flower is, and then lining it up on my first layer. So you just need to make sure it sits exactly on top of the image that's underneath. So I'm just slightly off there. There we go. I've just flattened it a little bit, so I'm just pushing up against that flower petal. Now normally I would stop and cut out that little blip, which was the indication that an email has just arrived on my computer, but I'm having a problem with the sound on this file, and I'm trying to do this last voiceover in one hit, so you'll have to excuse me if there are any extra little sounds that I would normally cut out. This seems to be the only way that this is going to work, and I don't really want to start again. So I am now shaping the flower centre, and you can see that I pushed that into my hand with the end of the pencil, and then I'm attaching the cupped shaped flower centre over the top of the decoupage flower to finish off the card. And it just gives a lovely dimension to that central flower on the gatefold to add a little bit of extra interest to a very pretty Antique Botanicals card. So I really hope that you've enjoyed that. It's quite an easy one to put together, but it's really effective and it would be great to give to lots of different people. You can change the colours and you could use some of the other stamps that are on the Antique Botanicals stamp set. So I'm going to be teaching this at a card class later on. And you can see there's the inside of the card all finished off. This is in daylight, so you can see a slight change in colour. So I really hope you've enjoyed this tutorial and that you give it a go for yourself. I'll leave the links at the end of the video as usual. So all that's left for me to say, and I'm hoping to get this all in one go, is thank you for watching. Please hit the subscribe button, the like button and the share button if you've enjoyed this video, and I look forward to crafting again with you very soon. Stay tuned for the links and thank you for watching. There's actually quite a lot of pressure trying to do this in one hit, so here we go. This link will take you back to my blog where you can see lots of other interesting things over there, as well as finding the dimensions for this card all printed out so you can easily make this card for yourself. This link will take you to the tutorial for this card, a completely different look with the same set of stamps, as well as giving you the link for the entire Rubber Dance set of tutorials, the Rubber Dance playlist. And then last but not least, a little tease. This link will take you back to my Etsy shop. Please hit the follow button because I will be launching a new workshop over there very soon, and this is a sneak peek of the canvas I will show you how to make.